It was just an old book on a dusty shelf, until Keanu Reeves opened it and found a note meant for someone who had vanished decades ago. The handwriting was familiar, the message haunting, and the truth it uncovered would take him across the world to find the woman who once saved his life. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The morning air in Portland was unusually crisp, wrapped in the scent of fresh rain and coffee from the corner shop. Keanu Reeves walked alone, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, savoring the rare silence of a day without a schedule. No interviews, no cameras, no obligations, just a quiet morning to be human. He wandered without destination, turning down a side street he hadn't noticed before. A crooked sign swung gently above a narrow storefront. It read, "Margot's Books and Finds," with faded gold letters etched on dusty glass. Drawn by the familiar comfort of old pages and forgotten stories, Keanu stepped inside. A bell above the door jingled softly. The shop was quiet. No music, no chatter, just the slow hum of time and the faint rustling of paper as a ceiling fan stirred the air. A calico cat slept undisturbed on the counter. Keanu smiled. It felt like stepping into another world. Not a movie set, not a hotel suite, just a place where nothing was required of him. He drifted toward the back of the store, passing rows of novels, history books, and shelves labeled with handwritten tags like sea legends, typewriter manuals, and outdated science. Near a dusty corner marked memoirs, something made him stop. A single weathered hardcover caught his eye. The spine was cracked, the corners frayed. It didn't have a title printed on the edge. Curious, he reached for it and pulled it free. The cover was a faded navy blue. No name, no image, no clue. He opened it carefully, mindful of the binding. And there it was. A folded piece of paper, yellowed with time, tucked just behind the front cover. Keanu hesitated for a moment, then unfolded it. The handwriting was neat, almost delicate. Inked in blue, slightly smudged as if written in haste, or with emotion. It read, "If you're reading this, I hope you find her. She never stopped believing in you." There was no name, no address, no signature. Keanu stared at it, heart strangely stirred. Something about the message tugged at a place inside him that rarely got touched. The phrasing, the tone, it wasn't just a note. It was a whisper across time, a tether to something unfinished. He flipped through the book's pages. Nothing stood out. No markings, no highlights. It wasn't even a memoir. It was a collection of poetry from the 1,960 lines about longing, absence, and faith in people unseen. He read the note again. "You never stop believing in you." It didn't make sense. And yet, somehow, it felt like it did. He looked around the store. The clerk at the front, an elderly woman with silver glasses, was now watching him curiously, as if she sensed something had changed. Keanu folded the note back and slid it into his jacket pocket. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a forgotten bookmark. It was a beginning. Keanu carried the book to the front counter, his thoughts still tangled around the note. The calico cat stirred as he approached, blinking once before curling back into itself. The woman behind the counter looked up from her magazine, adjusting her glasses as she gave him a warm smile. "Find something interesting?" she asked. He placed the book gently on the counter. "Maybe," he replied. "Do you remember who brought this one in?" She lifted the cover and squinted at the faded spine. No title. One of the unclaimed donations, I think. We get a box or two every month from estate sales. I shelved this one maybe 6 or 7 weeks ago. No record of who left it." Keanu hesitated. "Do you mind if I keep this note?" It was inside. She looked at the folded slip in his hand, then nodded. "You bought the book. Whatever's inside it belongs to you." He thanked her and left with the book tucked under his arm and the note still buzzing quietly in his chest. As he walked, his mind kept turning over the message. The words weren't poetic or exaggerated. They felt real, urgent even. What did it mean to believe in someone for decades? Who was this woman the note spoke of? And who was it written to? He stopped outside a coffee shop and sat on a bench. Pulling out his phone, he took a photo of the note. Then he opened his contacts, scrolling down to someone he trusted with strange things. Daniel, a friend who ran a private archival service in Los Angeles. The man had helped him track down rare photos from his childhood, including a few letters his mother had once left behind in an old storage unit. Keanu texted the image with a brief message. "Found this in a book in Portland. Can you trace the handwriting or anything else?" A few seconds later, the typing dots appeared. Then Daniel replied, "Interesting. Looks like late 60s penmanship. Very fluid but precise. I'll run it through our handwriting cross-check. Give me a day or two." Keanu pocketed his phone and looked down at the book again. The poetry inside was simple, almost shy. One short poem caught his eye. "The world moved on, but I remained, where silence keeps the echo warm." He closed the book gently. His heart was still unsettled. He hadn't expected his quiet morning to shift his world. And he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a coincidence. Someone had left that message behind for a reason. Maybe it had waited for him. The rest of the day moved slowly, but the note lingered in Keanu's thoughts like a melody he couldn't place. That night, back in his hotel room, he laid the book on the desk and placed the note beside it. He stared at the handwriting under the dim reading lamp, searching for something familiar. Nothing came to him. No flash of memory, no sudden recognition. Still, the ache it stirred felt personal. He thought about the woman mentioned. Whoever she was, she had believed in someone long after the world probably told her to stop. That kind of faith wasn't common, and someone had loved her enough to memorialize it. But why in this book? Why now? Keanu opened the book again and checked the inside cover. A name was faintly written in pencil. M.H. Rowan. The handwriting was different from the note, larger, shakier. Perhaps the owner? Or someone who gifted it? He scribbled the name down in a notepad. The next morning, Daniel texted again. No direct match to any major public letters or records. But I showed it to an archivist who said it resembles a woman's hand from rural California, 1970s. Possibly someone who worked as a teacher or librarian. Still digging. Keanu replied, "Thanks. Let me know if anything turns up." He sat with his coffee by the window and thought, if someone had believed in him. Maybe it was time to believe in something bigger, too. A mystery. A journey. Maybe even closure. He grabbed his jacket, tucked the note safely inside, and slid the book into his bag. His plans had changed. He no longer wanted a quiet walk through Portland's markets. He wanted answers. That afternoon, he returned to the bookstore. The bell above the door chimed again as he stepped inside. The same woman greeted him with a nod. "I was wondering," he said gently. "Do you keep donation records? Even something informal? Boxes labeled by where they came from?" She tapped her temple. "Not always, but I remember that one. It came in with a set of old records and paperbacks from a nursing home clearance, placed just outside of Eugene. I think the note you found may have come from that batch." Keanu felt something shift. "Do you remember the name?" "Millhouse Center," she said. "Why?" Keanu glanced down at the note one more time. "Because someone's story didn't end when the book closed," he said softly. "And I think it's time I find the next chapter." By noon, Keanu had packed a small overnight bag and was back on the road. The clouds hung low over Portland, and the wind tugged at the corners of his jacket as he stepped out of the hotel lobby. The book and note rested safely in the passenger seat of the rental car, carefully placed in a padded envelope he had borrowed from the front desk. He tapped Millhouse Center into his GPS and followed the winding roads out of the city, the skyline fading behind him. The highway opened up into rolling fields and soft hills. The closer he got to Eugene, the more the scenery seemed to slow down. Old barns leaning into the wind, mailboxes speckled with rust, and cedar fences running along green pastures. The Millhouse Center sat just off a quiet two-lane road, surrounded by tall pines and a garden that looked like it had once been beautiful. The sign at the entrance was faded, its white paint peeling at the edges. A red-breasted robin fluttered from a nearby tree as Keanu pulled into the small gravel lot. He stepped out of the car and stood for a moment, taking in the stillness. The building was old but well-kept, with ivy curling around the porch columns. He carried the envelope inside and was met by a soft-spoken receptionist who looked up from a crossword puzzle. "Can I help you?" she asked, her eyes curious but kind. "I'm looking for information," Keanu said, choosing his words carefully. "About a donation made to a bookstore in Portland. The books came from here, about 6 weeks ago." She raised an eyebrow. "You're not the first one who's asked about donations, but you are the first who came in person. I found a note in one of the books," he explained. "It was personal. I'm trying to find out who wrote it, or who it might have been meant for." She tilted her head thoughtfully. "You'll want to speak with Margot. She oversees donations and estate handling." Keanu followed her through a quiet hallway into an office that smelled faintly of lavender and wood polish. Margot, a woman in her late 60s with silver-streaked hair, was sorting papers at a large wooden desk. When she looked up and saw him, her smile faltered for a second. "You're Keanu Reeves, right?" "Yeah," he said, gently. "But today, I'm just someone trying to follow a thread." She nodded and motioned to a chair. "Then let's see where it leads." Margot adjusted her glasses and opened a large binder filled with donation logs. "We don't keep digital records for this. It's all paper," she said. 6 weeks ago, let me see." She flipped carefully through the pages until she found the right section. Her finger traced the entry. "Yes. We sent 4 boxes to Pendulum Books in Portland, mostly old paperbacks and handwritten poetry collections. Belonged to a woman named June Holloway." Keanu leaned forward. "Is she still here?" Margot's expression turned solemn. "No. June passed away about 2 months ago. No family, at least none that claimed her estate. She was quiet, kept to herself. Used to be a school teacher, then a librarian, then just someone who watched the world from her window. Do you know if she wrote letters, kept journals?" "She did," Margot nodded. "But most of it was donated with the books. A few private items were boxed up in case anyone came to claim them, but no one ever did. It's likely in storage." "Could I see it?" Margot studied him for a moment. Then she stood and led him down a side corridor to a locked storage room. Inside were dozens of boxes, neatly stacked, each labeled with names and dates. She pulled one labeled J. Holloway Personal and set it on a nearby table. Keanu opened it slowly. Inside were old photographs, greeting cards, and a bundle of letters tied together with twine. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded. One envelope caught his eye. Its edges were worn, and on the front, in soft handwriting, were the words, "To the boy from the pier." He felt something shift in his chest. Margot noticed. "What is it?" "I don't know," he said, barely above a whisper. "But I think I might have been that boy." He opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. "If you're reading this, then I never got to say goodbye. But I remember you. You were kind to me when we were young, when I needed it most. I don't know where life took you, but I've always believed that souls remember each other, even if names and faces change. If you ever find this, know that someone out there never forgot your light." His throat tightened. It wasn't a love letter. It was something quieter, something deeper. He looked at Margot. "Do you know where she lived?" "Kept mostly to herself at the end of the East Wing." "Kept mostly to herself. Always had a notebook open, always writing. Margot led him to June Holloway's old room. The door was unlocked, left mostly untouched since she passed. It was a small, sunlit space with a single window overlooking the pine trees. A bookshelf leaned against one wall, still filled with the remnants of a quiet life. Dog-eared novels, a framed photo of a seaside pier, and a ceramic mug filled with pens. Keanu stepped inside and immediately felt something stir. Not recognition exactly, more like a memory brushing the edge of his consciousness. He picked up the photo, a black and white snapshot of a boy and a girl standing at a pier railing. The boy's face was half turned, the girl was smiling gently, holding a kite string. It couldn't be. He looked closer. The boy's haircut was unmistakable, choppy and slightly wild, the kind his mother used to give him when they couldn't afford a barber. He exhaled slowly. It was him. He had been maybe 12, a trip to the Oregon coast with his uncle. He remembered now. A shy girl sitting on the bench, crying quietly. He had offered her a soda and sat beside her until she stopped. They had flown a kite together, no names exchanged, just kindness. He had forgotten, but she hadn't. He returned to the desk and opened the top drawer. Inside was one final notebook, with a note tucked inside. "If you found the book, you found me. Thank you." He closed the notebook slowly, his heart pounding. This wasn't about romance or fame. It was about a moment that changed someone's life, and came full circle years later. He turned to Margot. "I'd like to take this notebook, and the letter, if that's okay." She nodded. It's more than okay. It's what she would have wanted. As he walked back to his car with the items in hand, he looked once more at the note from the bookstore. "She never stopped believing in you." Now he knew who she was. And suddenly the quiet message, tucked in an old memoir, had become the loudest truth he'd heard in years. Back in Los Angeles, the house was quiet. The light through the kitchen window spilled across the hardwood floors, and a breeze nudged the curtains gently. Keanu placed the weathered book and folded note on his coffee table, then walked over to a worn cedar chest tucked away in a corner near the fireplace. He hadn't opened it in years. The chest had belonged to his mother, Diana. She had kept letters, trinkets, and postcards from her modeling years in Europe during the 1970 SS. It always smelled faintly of lavender and dust, a scent that immediately pulled him back to childhood afternoons when he would sit on the rug and listen to her stories. Stories about Paris, about backstage fittings in Milan, and once or twice about Prague, though she never stayed long on that city. Keanu slowly lifted the lid. Inside were yellowed envelopes tied together with ribbon, old Polaroids curled at the edges, and postcards with faded ink and exotic stamps. He leafed through one bundle labeled 19751-979 and paused when he saw the top card, a soft blue image of the Charles Bridge in Prague. The edges were cracked, and a thin crease ran through the middle, but the writing on the back was still legible. "To Diana and her son, may you both always find the light, even when it hides in silence. Love always. Amila." He froze. The writing wasn't identical to the bookstore note, but it carried the same rhythm, the same loops in the lowercase letters, and the same gentle sorrow threaded through every word. This wasn't a coincidence. His mind pulled the note from memory. "If you're reading this, I hope you find her. She never stopped believing in you." Was her his mother, or was it Mila? He checked the postmark, Prague, 1978. He pulled out more postcards, scanning the backs for names. A few were from fellow models, some from designers, but 4 more bore that same signature. Mila. One of them read, "Your son has the eyes of a listener. One day the world will hear what's inside him." Keanu sat down on the floor, heart racing now. If Mila had known him as a boy, that would place her close to his mother. Perhaps a colleague, maybe a roommate. But something about the tone of the letters felt deeper than friendship. There was affection, yes, but also distance, a kind of boundary kept by time or regret. He searched through the rest of the chest and finally came across a faded envelope, addressed in Mila's hand again. Inside was a black and white photograph. His mother, standing on a cobblestone street, laughing, arm in arm with a woman who had short, dark curls and high cheekbones. Mila, Keanu turned the photo over, written in the same looping script. Don't let her vanish. Keanu studied the photograph again, this time with slower eyes. There was something unusual about it. Not just the bond between his mother and Mila, but the subtle way Mila was looking at the camera. It was as if she knew the photo would be seen years later by someone searching. Someone like him. He gently set the photo beside the others and returned to the envelope, hoping there might be more. A folded sheet of fine stationery slipped out. It was a letter, never sent, addressed only with the name Deanna and no date. The ink had faded in places, but he read the words with growing reverence. I don't know if I'll ever send this. Perhaps it's enough to write it. You always said the universe listens to the honest heart. I think of you often. I think of your boy. I heard he's growing tall, kind, quiet, but strong. I wonder if he'll remember the woman who taught him to draw stars with both hands. Keanu blinked. He did remember that. One summer evening in Toronto, when he was barely 4, a woman with a soft accent had sat beside him on the floor and helped him draw constellations on black paper with silver pencils. He thought it had been a dream, or maybe one of his mother's friends passing through town. Now he wasn't so sure. He kept reading. If one day he finds this, if the stars align, tell him I never stopped believing in what he'd become. The world can be loud, but people like him are born for the quiet things. Truth, kindness. That kind of strength survives anything. There was no signature at the bottom, only a small drawing, a 5-pointed star with a swirl in the center. The same symbol appeared faintly on the corner of the note he found in the memoir at the bookstore. Keanu leaned back against the sofa. Mila hadn't just known him. She'd believed in him. Had she been trying to reach him for years? And if so, why now? Why through a book in a shop he hadn't meant to enter? The pieces weren't adding up. Yet they felt magnetically drawn to each other. His mother had died before he could ask these questions. And now all he had were breadcrumbs from a past neither woman had ever explained. He picked up the postcard again. The one that read, "May you both always find the light." And then the note. She'd never stop believing in you. It felt like a message sent across time. A gentle nudge from a life he'd left untouched. But what did Mila want him to find now? And, more urgently, was she still alive? Keanu stood and paced the room. There was a hum in the air, like a quiet urgency beneath the silence. He took the postcard, the letter, and the photograph and laid them out on the table. The more he looked, the more it seemed like they were never meant to stay buried. They had waited, patient and silent, for the right moment. And somehow, that moment had arrived. He returned to the weathered book where it all began. He flipped through its pages again, slowly, hoping for another clue. Tucked inside the back cover was a faint pencil mark, coordinates. No name, just numbers. He pulled out his phone and typed them into a map app. The location that appeared was across the world. A quiet hillside village on the edge of Prague. A town so small it barely registered. He stared at the screen. Prague. The same place Mila's postcard had come from. The same city where his mother had modeled in her 20s. He remembered the few stories she had shared, how the city had changed her, how it had held both pain and beauty. Could Mila still be there? His heart beat faster. This wasn't just a mystery anymore, it was becoming a calling. He didn't know why she had waited. He didn't know why the message had found him now, but deep down, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. a sense that this journey wasn't about the past. It was about something unfinished. He gathered the items and gently placed them in a small leather pouch he kept for travel. Then he stood by the window and looked out across the quiet Portland street, the sky soft with late afternoon light. Sometimes the universe doesn't shout, it whispers. And this whisper was clear. He had to go, not as a celebrity, not as someone chasing fame or nostalgia, but as a son. As a man whose mother had once been loved by a woman named Mila, and whose life may still hold a truth he hadn't yet discovered. He didn't know what he'd find in Prague, but something deep inside told him this wasn't just a search for a person. It was a search for a promise, one that had been waiting too long to be fulfilled. And he would follow it, wherever it led. Keanu Reeves booked his flight under a quiet alias he used for personal travel. He told no one, not even his assistant, what he was doing. This wasn't a publicity tour or a work trip. It was something deeper, something personal. A calling wrapped in dust and silence that had waited years to be heard. As the plane took off from Portland, he stared out the window, watching the city fade beneath layers of cloud and memory. It had been decades since he last set foot in Prague. He had vague recollections of visiting the city with his mother long ago, when she still smiled more easily and talked about her youth without the weight of loss. He remembered the winding cobblestone streets, the faint music drifting through open windows, and how she once paused in front of a weathered theater to whisper, "This city gave me everything." And back then, he hadn't understood what she meant, but now it echoed. The flight was long, and somewhere over the Atlantic, he pulled out the small pouch containing the postcard, the folded note, and the photo of his mother with Mila. He ran his fingers over the photo's edges, faded and curled, as if it had been waiting in the dark too long. He stared at Mila's face again, eyes full of quiet joy, mouth frozen mid-laughter. There was an intensity to her gaze even in stillness. He couldn't shake the feeling that if he found her, he'd also find something about himself that had been missing all these years. When the plane touched down at Václav Havel Airport, the sky was a cool shade of silver and a soft drizzle blanketed the city. Keanu slipped through customs quietly, keeping his cap low and his presence invisible. Prague hadn't changed much. The architecture still bore its old-world elegance, with buildings that leaned like tired guardians of time. But there was also something new, an energy beneath the stones, a rhythm that felt alive. He took a cab into the heart of the city, asking the driver in halting Czech to pass by Vinohrady, the neighborhood his mother had mentioned in old letters. The driver smiled at the request. "Artist place," the man said. "Bohemian air. Good choice." Keanu gazed out the window as they drove. The streets of Vinohrady felt like a half-forgotten dream. Cafes with golden light, bookstores with second-hand paperbacks in the window, and flower shops that spilled color onto the sidewalks. He stepped out and began to walk, his steps slow and careful, searching for something he couldn't name. He wasn't sure what would come next, but he knew Prague was where the answers would begin. The air was crisp, and every breath seemed to pull memories from the walls. Keanu wandered past narrow alleys where musicians used to play, and cafes where artists debated poetry over steaming cups. He stopped at a small square that held a fountain surrounded by benches. His mother once wrote a letter about this place. "Mila loved to sing here on Sundays," she had said. Her voice would stop people in their tracks. Keanu stood still, listening to the wind as if it might carry a ghost of that voice. The square was quiet now, save for a few pigeons and the distant chime of a church bell. He walked to a nearby bookstore, thinking someone there might remember her, but the owner had changed. No memory of Mila, no trace. For hours, Keanu wandered the district, slipping in and out of shops, showing the old photo of Mila and his mother. Most people shook their heads kindly. A few recognized Diana from her modeling years, but none could recall the woman beside her. Just as dusk began to settle, he stepped into a small florist shop tucked between a bakery and a watch repair store. The bell above the door gave a tired jingle. Inside, the scent of fresh lilies and drying lavender filled the air. An elderly woman stood behind the counter, arranging peonies into a vase. Her hands were lined and gentle. Keanu removed his cap and approached slowly. "Excuse me," he said softly, offering the photo. "Do you recognize either of these women?" The florist squinted and reached for her glasses. She studied the image in silence, her eyes narrowing, her expression growing thoughtful. "That one," she said, pointing at Mila. "Yes, I haven't seen her in years, but she used to come in here sometimes to buy violets. Always asked for violets. Said they reminded her of someone." Keanu leaned forward, his heart racing slightly. The woman nodded. "She told me once. Mila." He almost laughed from relief. After hours of dead ends, someone finally remembered. "She was a singer, wasn't she?" Keanu asked. "Yes. She used to sing in the square outside, every other Sunday, rain or shine. Had a voice that made you forget your troubles," the woman said. "But one day she just stopped coming. That was, maybe 15 years ago? Did she ever mention where she went?" The woman looked out the window, then back at him. "No, but she left behind a journal once. I kept it. Thought someone might come looking." Keanu felt the air shift. This was the moment the past started to breathe again. The florist bent down beneath the counter and retrieved a faded, leather-bound notebook wrapped in a ribbon. It was worn along the edges, like it had been opened and closed many times, but treated with care. She placed it gently on the counter and looked up at Keanu with soft eyes. "I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. I always hoped someone would come looking for her. I guess I was right to wait." Keanu carefully untied the ribbon and opened the first page. In delicate cursive, it read, "For Diana and the boy who gave me hope." His hands froze. The next few pages were filled with musings, poems, and sketches of places that looked familiar. Parks, fountains, even the bookstore where he'd found the original note. But the entries weren't random. They were reflections on choices, regrets, and love not spoken. One entry caught his eye. "He was 5 when I last saw him. He held my hand when the rain scared him, not knowing I was already planning to leave. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. His mother never blamed me." Keanu's heart clenched. Had Mila once lived with them? Visited often enough that a 5-year-old version of himself trusted her? He couldn't remember. But the pain behind the words hit him like a wave. Another passage read, "If he ever finds this, I want him to know he was the reason I kept going. I left so he wouldn't carry my burden. But part of my heart stayed in that house." Keanu closed the journal for a moment, overcome by the weight of it all. He looked up at the florist. "Do you have any idea where she might be now?" The woman thought carefully. "There was talk years ago that she moved outside the city. Some said she was ill, others said she went to take care of an elderly aunt. I never got the truth. But there's a place in the hills, an old music retreat. Mila once mentioned it when she bought orchids. Said she dreamed of teaching there someday." Keanu nodded, already forming a plan in his mind. "I think I need to find that place," he said. The florist smiled. "If you do, tell her the violets still bloom every spring, and that someone remembered." As Keanu stepped back into the cold Prague evening, journal in hand, he looked up at the darkening sky. The stars above the city felt closer now, like they, too, were waiting for him to complete the next step in a journey long overdue. And somewhere in those hills, a voice from his past might still be waiting to sing again. The next morning, Keanu walked quietly through the older district of Prague, guided by the florist's directions. The streets carried the scent of rain and cobblestone dust. Time felt thick here. Slower. Wrought iron balconies leaned over narrow alleys like curious bystanders. Locals moved about with a quiet rhythm, and Keanu, dressed in a simple coat and scarf, blended in without drawing attention. The café appeared around the corner like something from another time. The windows were dark, the sign above faded into barely legible letters. Café Ticho. The silence it promised matched its condition. Boards nailed across the front door, ivy crawling up the side. But what caught Keanu's breath was the mural. Painted on the side wall, half faded but still graceful, was a woman in profile, seated at a piano. Her fingers hovered above invisible keys. Her expression was serene and lost in melody. Keanu stepped closer and touched the paint. Beneath the dust and weather, someone had once painted her with love. He walked around the side of the building, found a rusted service door, and jimmied it open with a soft creak. Inside, the air was musty, tinged with old wood and memories. He moved through the dark room with care. The tables were still there, some upright, others toppled as if left in a hurry. Toward the back, beneath the small elevated stage, a drawer had been pulled out and left half open. Something stuck out from underneath. A frayed corner of a book. Keanu crouched, brushed off the dust, and pulled out the object. It was a music journal, thick and well-worn. The pages inside were filled with hand-drawn sheet music, lyrics in Czech, and notes in the margins. Some pages were smudged with age and fingerprints. Whoever had written in it had loved music deeply. Near the center of the journal, one page was folded back as if waiting for someone. He turned it carefully and read the words written in a familiar hand. "If someone ever comes looking, tell them I believed in the boy with quiet eyes." Keanu froze. It was her. The handwriting matched the note in the bookstore. There was no doubt now Mila had left these behind, as if scattering messages across time and distance, waiting for someone to find them when the world was finally ready. He sat down on the edge of the stage and held the journal in his lap. Dust floated in the sunbeams that pierced the boarded windows, and for a long moment, Keanu just breathed. The silence of the cafe wasn't empty anymore. It felt like someone was still playing music, quietly, just beyond hearing. And she had remembered him. The boy with quiet eyes. A name he hadn't heard, but somehow it reached through the years with perfect clarity. He whispered the name aloud for the first time in decades. Mila. Keanu stood slowly, gripping the journal as though it were something sacred. The pages crackled softly when he closed it, the dust from decades past now settling back into silence. The message, small as it was, had cracked open something much larger inside him. Not just the mystery of Mila, but a part of his own past he had almost forgotten. The innocence of being seen without fame, the comfort of being remembered by someone who loved music more than applause. He scanned the room again, this time with purpose. He wanted more traces of her. He stepped behind the bar, where faded photographs curled beneath broken frames. Some showed groups of people holding guitars, violins, or standing around pianos. In one, a young woman stood at the center. She had long, dark hair pulled into a braid and a delicate smile that felt strangely alive. There was no name on the back, but Keanu knew. It had to be Mila. He took a photo and tucked it between the pages of the journal. A small door behind the stage led to a cramped green room. The walls were painted in deep blue, now peeling at the corners. There was an old upright piano, its keys yellowed. Dust covered it like a second skin. But Keanu stepped closer, raised the fallboard, and gently pressed one of the keys. A low, trembling note spilled into the room, then another. He played a simple scale, and the piano responded like an old friend waking from sleep. He sat for a moment, unsure why he felt compelled to play. He wasn't a pianist. But his fingers moved anyway. He played something soft, slow, something between memory and invention. A piece that didn't exist until it met the silence. Behind him, a floorboard creaked, not from footsteps, but pressure. He stood and investigated. In the corner of the room, Part of the wooden floor felt slightly raised. He knelt and pried it loose. Beneath was a small compartment, wrapped in linen, tied with twine. Keanu opened it carefully. Inside was another note, written in the same delicate hand. To the boy with quiet eyes. If you're here, then it means you've grown into the man I always knew you would become. Don't forget what kindness can change. Love never vanishes. It waits. Sometimes in silence, sometimes in music. Keanu held the note to his chest. This wasn't a coincidence. It never had been. Mila hadn't disappeared. She had waited, in the way only artists do, with pieces of herself left behind in words, melody, and time. She had known one day he might return, that something somehow would draw him back. And now that he was here, the only question left was, where had she gone? He needed to find her. The next morning, Keanu returned to the music cafe just after sunrise. The light filtering through the cracked windows made the dust dance like particles of memory. He sat on the edge of the stage, holding the music journal in one hand, Mila's last note in the other. Her words echoed through his mind like lyrics from an unfinished song. Love never vanishes, it waits. Sometimes in silence, sometimes in music. He reached out to a local historian he'd met the day before at the hotel, a woman named Aliska who specialized in Prague's forgotten venues. She arrived within the hour, notebook in hand, curious why an international actor was so invested in a dilapidated cafe. But when he showed her the note and journal, her demeanor shifted. She grew quiet, thoughtful. Helena Milanova, she finally said. That was her name, but here she was just Mila. She sang here nearly every week. Then one night she just vanished. Do you know where she went? Keanu asked. Eliska shook her head. No one knew. Some thought she left the country. Others said she had an accident. But I always believed she had a reason. People like her don't just disappear. She walked with Keanu through the rest of the building. In the back hallway, she pointed to a faded emergency exit sign. There's a rear stairwell. It led to a private apartment above the cafe. It's sealed now, but maybe... Keanu didn't hesitate. They made their way up the narrow steps, the wooden railing creaking beneath their weight. The door at the top was locked, but Eliska had a master key. She turned it slowly, and the door gave way with a deep, aching groan. The room inside was small but cozy, filled with the scent of old fabric and forgotten perfume. A narrow bed, a tiny writing desk, a bookshelf filled with dog-eared poetry in Czech, English, and French. Photographs lined the window ledge, many of them of Diana, Keanu's mother. Some of the two women together, one of a young Keanu on a tricycle, clipped from a magazine. This was more than just a room, it was a shrine to memory. He stepped to the desk and found one final envelope, yellowed with time. Inside, another note, longer this time. If you're reading this, then you've found your way home. I never stopped believing in you, not when the world forgot, not when you doubted yourself. I watch from a distance, but always with love. When the time is right, I'll be where the music begins again. Keanu folded the letter with trembling hands. Mila hadn't left without purpose. She had hidden herself in time, waiting not to be found, but to be understood. And now, one last clue remained. Where the music begins again, he would follow it. Because sometimes, the past doesn't ask for closure. It asks to be honored. Keanu sat in a quiet cafe near the old quarter of Prague, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee. Across from him, Tomáš, a local historian with salt and pepper hair and wire-framed glasses, flipped through a folder of photocopied documents. The table between them was cluttered with Prague city records, music festival brochures from the 1980s, and black and white photographs from an era when the city hummed with political unrest and... I remember Mila, Tomáš said, voice low and reverent. She was a rising star, not just musically, but in spirit. She had this fire inside her. She wrote songs that made people believe things could change. Keanu listened intently, his fingers resting on a copy of a 1989 concert flyer. There, in faded ink, was the name, Mila Vetrova. Her face wasn't on the poster, but the fact that she was billed alongside some of Prague's most defiant voices told him something. She wasn't just a background singer, she had presence, purpose. Tomas leaned in and pointed to a yellowed newspaper clipping from November 1991. This article here, he said, tapping it, was the last official mention of her. She was detained during a protest outside the Communist Party headquarters. After that, she vanished. Keanu scanned the article. Mila's name was mentioned alongside a short list of detainees. There was no mugshot, no further details, just a short note that several individuals were held for questioning and later released. But Mila's name never appeared again in public records. No travel documents, no job listings, no death certificate, nothing. Some say she defected, Tomas continued. Others say she went underground. But there's another theory, that she was silenced. Keanu's brows furrowed. Silenced? Tomas nodded. That era was complicated. People disappeared all the time, especially those who spoke too loudly, too honestly. But I never believed she was just erased. She was too smart for that, too careful. He slid another sheet across the table. It was an article from a small arts magazine, dated a few months before Mila's disappearance. It featured a photograph, grainy and creased, but clear enough. Keanu's breath caught in his throat. The woman in the image was Mila. Her hair was long and curled, cascading around her shoulders. She wore a black dress and sat at a piano, one hand lifted mid-chord. But it wasn't just her presence that stopped Keanu. It was the child in her lap. A boy, maybe 6 years old. Dark hair. Gentle, solemn eyes. Eyes Keanu recognized as his own. He stared at the photo, stunned. Where did this come from? Tomas shrugged. The article was about protest art. Mila's performance that night was legendary, they say, but no one knew she had a child. That boy. Do you think it's you? Keanu didn't answer immediately. He was still staring at the image, feeling the weight of 1,000 memories he didn't have. He didn't remember being in Prague at that age. But the resemblance was haunting. And that look, the way the boy leaned into Mila's side, felt too familiar to ignore. Keanu turned the photograph over, hoping for some scribbled clue. The back was blank, just worn edges and smudges from time. Still, something inside him stirred, like a thread from the past had tugged loose. He leaned back in his chair, eyes still fixed on the image. I never knew her, he said quietly. At least, I don't think I did. My mom spent time in Europe during her modeling years. She never talked about it much. Tomas nodded with sympathy. The early 80s were turbulent here. It wasn't unusual for foreign models, artists, even journalists to pass through Prague. If Mila knew your mother, they might have met in that world. Keanu looked again at the boy in the photo. There was a strange tenderness in Mila's posture, protective, almost maternal. The photo didn't feel posed, it felt personal. Tomas reached into his satchel and pulled out a thick local registry book. This is the municipal census from 1984, he explained, flipping pages. If Mila lived in Prague with a child, even temporarily, she might have been listed. Keanu watched silently as Tomas traced his finger down the faded lists, rows of names, addresses, ages. Then he stopped. Mila Vetrova, he read. Registered at Karlova 18, occupation musician, dependent listed. Name redacted. It's blacked out. Why would a child's name be redacted? Keanu asked, leaning in. That's the strange part, Tomas replied. Only in sensitive cases. Defections, witness protections, political entanglements. They erase the record. That's not common. Keanu felt a pulse of unease and curiosity at the same time. So, someone wanted the boy's identity hidden? It would seem so, Tomas confirmed. They sat in silence for a moment. The hum of conversation in the café faded as Keanu's thoughts turned inward. He tried to imagine his mother as a young woman, traveling with a child, crossing paths with a firebrand musician in the shadows of Cold War Prague. What had happened between Mila and his family? Was she a friend, a protector, a relative, or something even deeper? Could she have been family? Keanu asked slowly. Tomas considered it. It's possible. But if she was, someone went to great lengths to hide that, perhaps to protect her. Or you. Keanu ran his hand through his hair, still staring at the image. He didn't recognize the cafe where the photo was taken, but the piano, the angle of the walls. Something about it matched the mural he'd seen in the abandoned music cafe days earlier. The pieces were connecting. She hadn't just performed there. She had left echoes behind. "I need to find that building again," Keanu said. "Maybe there's more, something she left?" Tomas gave a small smile. "I'll take you. But be prepared. Places like that hold ghosts. And they don't always give up their stories easily." That evening, Tomas and Keanu returned to the shuttered cafe. It looked even more forgotten in the moonlight. Cracked paint curled like old parchment, and ivy had begun crawling through the broken windows. Tomas handed Keanu a flashlight and gestured toward the side door. It creaked open with a reluctant groan. Inside, dust hung in the air like fog. The silence felt heavy, almost sacred. Keanu stepped carefully over warped floorboards, his light sweeping across abandoned chairs and fallen posters. Then it landed on something familiar. The same mural he'd seen before. A woman at the piano, her head bowed in concentration. Only now, in the beam of the flashlight, he noticed a detail he'd missed. A faint inscription carved into the base of the stage. He knelt down and wiped the grime away. The words were shaky but deliberate. "For the boy who never cried. If you find this, you were always meant to." He froze. That phrase, it echoed something his mother had once told him as a child. After his father left, after one of those endless nights when he lay in silence instead of tears. "You're strong," she had whispered. "You're my boy who never cries." It wasn't coincidence. Mila had known. She had seen him. There was more. Tucked behind a loose panel in the piano's side, Keanu discovered an envelope. Inside was a pressed flower, a photograph of Mila holding sheet music, and a final message. "I had to leave before the truth could find me, but I watched from a distance. You were loved more than you know. Don't let the silence swallow what matters. Speak, play, remember." Keanu clutched the envelope to his chest and sat on the stage's edge. He didn't cry, but something inside cracked open. Something old and buried. The quiet boy had become a quiet man. But now, silence didn't feel safe anymore. It felt like a cage. Tomas placed a hand on his shoulder. "You were never just reading her story," he said gently. "You were part of it." Keanu nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on the piano. And for the first time in years, he reached out and touched a key. A single note rang out. Soft, barely audible, but in that lonely cafe, beneath layers of dust and decades of unanswered questions, it felt like a beginning. Not an ending, just a beginning. Keanu sat by the window of his hotel room, the early light of morning filtering through sheer curtains. He held the faded newspaper clipping gently between his fingers. The black and white photo stared back at him. Mila, youthful and strong, her smile wide and open as she cradled a small boy no older than 6. Keanu's eyes lingered on the child's face. There was no mistaking the resemblance. and snapped a quick photo of the clipping with his phone and sent it to Kim with a short message. "Do you recognize this? Prague, 1980s. I think that's me." The reply came faster than expected. Kim responded with a series of rapid texts. "Oh my God, yes, that's you, Keanu. And that's Mila. She was with us in Paris too. She was always around during Mom's fashion gigs." Then another message followed. "I remember her singing lullabies to you at night." A quiet breath escaped Keanu. His hands trembled slightly as he set the phone down. It wasn't just a coincidence. Mila hadn't been a stranger passing through their lives. She had been a presence, a caretaker, a guardian of sorts during a chaotic time. A woman who had quietly left notes for the future, knowing perhaps one day he'd look back. His mind swirled with flashes of memory, dimly lit apartments, the scent of perfume and old wood floors, soft music at night, and a calming voice humming near his bed. He couldn't picture the face clearly back then, but now, with the confirmation, it all rushed back with haunting clarity. Why hadn't he remembered her more vividly? Had life, grief, and time buried the details? The thought unsettled him. There had always been gaps in his early memories, especially during his mother's career peaks when they traveled from city to city. Assistants, caretakers, and friends came and went. But Mila, she had been more than that. He remembered something else now. One night in Paris, he had cried over a nightmare. A woman had picked him up, held him in her arms, and whispered something about stars. He couldn't recall the words, but the voice, it had soothed him in a way nothing else had. Keanu got up, paced the room, and stared out over the rooftops of Prague. Mila had left messages, not just in letters, but in lives, in moments. She had planted memories like seeds, trusting that one day they would bloom into meaning. He felt that now, and deep in his heart he wondered, what else had she left behind? Keanu folded the article carefully and slipped it into his notebook. Then he opened his laptop and began scanning through old photo albums stored digitally. Scans of his mother's modeling years, red carpets, studio shots, and personal moments captured on film. He paused at a folder marked Paris 1985. Inside, dozens of thumbnails loaded slowly. Amid the glamour and posed images, one photo stood out. It was not taken professionally. It was soft and candid. His mother, Diana, sat at a kitchen table, laughing, and beside her was a young woman with dark hair and piercing eyes, Mila. She held a teacup in one hand and had her other arm loosely wrapped around a small boy sitting on her lap. Keanu enlarged the photo. The boy had quiet eyes. He wasn't smiling, but he looked safe, comfortable, sheltered. He zoomed in on Mila. Her expression wasn't one of obligation. It was affection, warmth, like someone who had taken on a duty far beyond what was asked, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Keanu's throat tightened. He saved the image, then leaned back in the chair, lost in thought. It made sense now. How he felt when he found the first note in the bookstore. That mysterious sense of recognition. The pull in his chest. It hadn't just been intrigue. It was memory reaching through time. A whisper from someone who had once cared for him when he was too young to understand it. Suddenly, the note's wording hit differently. If you're reading this, I hope you find her. She never stopped believing in you. It wasn't a stranger's message, it was a gift. A breadcrumb Mila had left, hidden inside a book that might one day end up in the hands of the boy she used to sing to. The boy with quiet eyes. His phone buzzed again. It was Kim. "I always thought she was special," the message read. "Mom trusted her so much. Mila was different, quiet but strong. She never tried to be in the spotlight." Keanu typed back, "I think she's been trying to reach me for years." Then another thought occurred to him. Had Mila hidden more? If she had planted a message in a memoir in Portland and another under a stage in Prague, Perhaps there were more threads waiting to be discovered. This felt less like coincidence and more like a deliberate pattern. The idea struck him with both awe and urgency. He stood, grabbed his coat, and headed back toward the city. There was more to uncover. Somewhere, someone knew what had happened to Mila. And maybe, just maybe, she had left one final message meant only for him. Later that night, Keanu returned to his hotel room and spread out everything he had gathered. The photos, the note from the memoir, the article from Tomas, and the scanned postcard. Each piece seemed small alone, but together they whispered something much greater, a silent language of longing, of love hidden in the cracks of a busy life. He placed the photo of Mila holding him beside the first note and looked at them under the soft lamp glow. For a long time he said nothing. Then he spoke softly, almost to himself. She knew I might forget, that I'd grow up and lose the thread, so she made sure the thread stayed. He felt a shift in his chest, like grief but not bitter. It was warm. It was the kind that came with remembering something precious that had been buried too long. His phone buzzed again, a new message from Kim. She used to hum the same melody every time she held you. It wasn't a lullaby I recognized. I still remember the way you leaned into her shoulder. Keanu closed his eyes. A faint melody stirred in the back of his mind. Soft, lilting, like water weaving through air. He hadn't heard it in decades, but suddenly he could almost hum it. That song wasn't in any music journal. It wasn't recorded. It lived only in memory, and perhaps it lived somewhere else. He picked up the postcard again. On the back, a line from Mila read, "One day, the music will find him again." There was no doubt left in his mind. Mila had loved him. Not as a friend of his mother, not as a distant acquaintance, but deeply, with the heart of someone who had once been family, maybe even more than that. The question now was, what happened to her? Was she still alive? Or was this trail her final attempt to be remembered? Keanu wasn't ready to accept either answer yet. What mattered now was continuing, listening, following, and finding that music again. He looked out the hotel window at the lights of Prague flickering like quiet stars. Somewhere in this city, he believed, the final note still waited to be played. And if he could find it, he would finally hear the melody in full. The one she had started long ago. The one he carried unknowingly through the years. A melody meant for the boy with quiet eyes. Keanu stood by the window of his quiet Prague hotel room, the morning lights spilling across the bed. He held the photograph in one hand, the back of the frame in the other. Something had rattled inside when he picked it up. Gently prying it open, he found a folded piece of paper tucked in the thin space behind the cardboard backing. It was an old train ticket. The paper had yellowed slightly, but the ink was still visible. The departure read, Prague to Vienna, August 21, 1991, 7:12 a.m. His brow furrowed. It was the exact date Tomas had mentioned, the day of the violent crackdown that had silenced many activists. Mila had this ticket. She never used it. Keanu stared at the date, a chill brushing across his spine. Had Mila been planning to escape? Did something stop her? Or was she taken before she could board? He called Tomas immediately. When he read the details aloud, Tomas responded with quiet awe. That train was almost empty, Tomas said. Many who feared arrest planned to leave that day. If Mila had that ticket, she must have known danger was closing in. Vienna was neutral. It would have been a safe haven. Keanu sat down slowly. The weight of the ticket in his hand felt heavier now. I'm going, he said. I'm taking that train. Tomas didn't hesitate. I'll arrange the same route. Even if the stops have changed, the path is the same. By late afternoon, Keanu stood at Prague's central station. The modern terminal had changed in appearance, but echoes of the past lingered beneath its steel beams. He boarded the train quietly, taking a window seat near the back. The carriage vibrated as it began its journey south. The hum of the engine, the gentle sway of the cabin, it all settled into a rhythm that carried him back in time. He watched the countryside blur past. Golden fields, forested hills, and villages nestled in valleys. Somewhere along this route 34 years ago, Mila should have sat. Maybe she'd planned to bring someone with her. Maybe she had been afraid. Maybe she'd carried hope in her chest, only to be stopped by something none of them had ever understood. As the train rolled toward Austria, Keanu pressed his forehead to the cool glass. He imagined her looking out the same window, her eyes scanning the horizon, wondering if someone she loved would meet her at the end of the line. The ticket was never torn. Her journey was never completed. But now, maybe his would be. When the train pulled into Vienna Central Station, the evening light bathed the platform in gold. Keanu stepped off slowly, letting the air settle around him. He didn't rush. Every movement felt intentional. This wasn't just a destination. It was a thread leading deeper into a mystery that had followed him since childhood. He moved through the station, passing travelers, families, and workers finishing their shifts. The modern design contrasted sharply with the era Mila had lived in, but some of the structure's bones remained the same: stone columns, iron railings. He imagined her walking here, clutching that ticket, trying not to look back. Keanu made his way to the information counter and waited quietly until a clerk looked up. The man wore wire-rimmed glasses and had a kind expression. "Hello. I'm wondering if the station maintains any archived records, specifically from August 1991. I'm looking for lost and found reports. It's personal." The man blinked, surprised. "That's quite a while back." "I know," Keanu said, "but anything from that day could help." The clerk disappeared into a back room and returned with a form, scribbling a number across the top. "You'll want to speak with an archivist, office D12, lower level. They handle unclaimed items and reports. It's rare, but we do have some from that time." Keanu thanked him and followed the narrow signs toward a more industrial part of the station. The hallway lights buzzed faintly, pipes lined the ceiling. At the end, he found the door marked D12 and knocked. A middle-aged woman answered, clearly surprised to see someone at that hour. She wore a gray cardigan, and her desk was surrounded by shelves of boxes and paper files. "I was told you managed lost items from long ago," Keanu said. She nodded slowly. "We have archives dating back to the 70s. Not many people come looking. I'm looking for a woman. Her name was Mila. She may have had a ticket for a train from Prague on August 21, 1991. I found her unused ticket. I believe something may have happened before she boarded. I'm hoping there was a report, or anything that belonged to her." The woman's expression softened. "That day," she said quietly, "there was unrest. We received several items, abandoned luggage, papers, even a child's toy. Wait here." Keanu sat down as she vanished between the shelves. The room smelled of old paper and something metallic. His heart pounded. When she returned, she was holding a small box labeled with the date. "It was never claimed," she said. "No name, but the item inside was unusual. It's the only thing we still have from that day." She placed it gently in front of him. Keanu stared at the box for a long moment before slowly lifting the lid. Inside, nestled in layers of faded linen, was a delicate silver pendant shaped like a treble clef. It was worn, the edges dulled by time, but there was something undeniably familiar about it. He picked it up carefully and turned it over. On the back, etched in a looping hand, were two words in Czech: "Verum v tebe." "I believe in you." His chest tightened. It was Mila. It had to be. She had meant for someone, maybe even him, to find this. Maybe she never made it to the train. Maybe she had been forced to leave this behind in haste. Whatever the reason, this pendant was her final message. Keanu looked up at the archivist, who was watching him quietly. "This belonged to someone important," he said. "I can see that," she replied gently. "You can take it. It's been waiting long enough." Outside, the station buzzed with evening energy, but Keanu moved slowly, the pendant now resting in his coat pocket. His thoughts swirled. If Mila left this behind, then she had wanted him, or someone, to follow her story. And now, more than ever, he felt the need to uncover the rest. He walked toward a quiet bench at the edge of the platform and sat down. As the sounds of trains rolling in and out echoed around him, he held the pendant again and stared into the setting sun. Somewhere there was more. Mila's trail hadn't ended in Vienna. It had just turned a corner. The man behind the counter at the Lost and Found office looked at Keanu with a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. He turned to the back shelves, where dust-covered ledgers and faded tags told forgotten stories. After a few quiet minutes, he returned, holding a wooden box the size of a briefcase. Its surface was worn but polished with time, and the initials M.X. were etched carefully into the lid. He set it down on the counter, hesitating. This was logged on August 23, 1991. It's never been claimed. Keanu's breath caught in his throat. That was the exact date on the train ticket Mila never used. The archivist handed him a pair of gloves. "You can open it here. We'll need to record the contents." Keanu nodded, handling the box with reverence. The clasp opened with a click, and the lid creaked as it lifted. Inside, wrapped in delicate silk, was a violin. Its wood was dark and smooth, carved with precision. The instrument looked old, but it had clearly been cared for. Beneath it, neatly tied in ribbon, were a collection of letters, each one worn at the edges but still sealed. And beneath the letters, resting alone, was a single envelope. Keanu gently picked it up. The handwriting was instantly familiar. "To the boy with quiet eyes. When he's ready." He stood frozen for a moment. Then he slowly untied the ribbon, slid the envelope open, and pulled out a handwritten letter folded in thirds. The paper trembled in his hands. The words began simply, "My dearest Keanu, if you are reading this, then time has brought you here, in the way I always hoped it might." Tears blurred his vision as he read the rest. Mila's voice returning across decades. She spoke not as a stranger, but as someone who had watched him grow. She wrote of the days in Paris with his mother, the lullabies, the stories she told him before bed. She mentioned a moment on the balcony when he was 6, how he looked up at the stars and said, "Maybe I came from one of those." "I always believed you were meant to do something important," the letter continued, "but I also knew I had to go. I saw things then that I couldn't unsee. I made enemies during my music and protest days, people who wouldn't hesitate to hurt those I loved. I chose to vanish to protect your future. I hoped one day you'd understand." Keanu felt the weight of the violin's silence behind him. Mila had left not only the instrument, but her final truth. And she had waited for him to be ready. Not famous, not older, just ready. Keanu folded the letter with care, placing it back inside the envelope like a sacred artifact. He turned his eyes to the other stack of letters bundled in ribbon beneath the violin. The archivist nodded silently, giving him space. One by one, Keanu opened the delicate envelopes, each one marked with dates spanning from 1986 to 1991. They were written in the same flowing script, always addressed simply to Diana and the boy. In one letter, Mila described her fear after being detained during a protest. She had been arrested for performing a forbidden ballad at a student-led march. Her words were full of tension, but never despair. She always ended her letters with a message of hope, signing off with, For the quiet soul I love as my own. Keanu traced the ink with his fingers, remembering that voice that had lulled him to sleep as a child. It hadn't been just a family friend. Mila had been something more, a protector, a guide, perhaps even a surrogate mother when his own had been away or struggling. The realization was overwhelming. One letter stood out. It was dated just 2 weeks before the unclaimed train ticket. Mila had written it hurriedly, her words less polished. She mentioned a contact in Vienna and a plan to leave the country with documents she had acquired. She wrote of fears that her actions would be misunderstood, but insisted it was the only way to disappear safely. "I will not make it to Vienna unless the wind turns in my favor," she wrote. "If I don't arrive and this box is ever found, I want you to know the truth. I left because I loved you both too much to stay." Keanu felt a deep ache rise in his chest. How much of this had his mother known? Had Mila ever tried to make contact again, or had she left the world quietly, slipping into legend, trusting that time would one day carry her story into his hands? He looked at the violin again. It was more than an instrument. It was a symbol of a life hidden behind layers of silence and sacrifice, the kind of silence that protected others, the kind of sacrifice that only someone who truly loved could make. As he placed the letters gently back in the box, the archivist returned with a solemn expression. "We can release the box to you now. It was never officially claimed, and your identification matches the name in the letters." Keanu nodded, still unable to speak. He carried the box outside, stepping into the soft light of late afternoon. It felt as if the world had paused, waiting for him to fully absorb what had just been handed to him. A piece of his past had finally found its way home. That evening, Keanu returned to his hotel in Vienna with the wooden box cradled in his arms like something alive. He placed it gently on the bed and sat across from it in silence. For hours, he didn't move. He simply stared. The envelope with the words, "To the boy with quiet eyes," lay on top, now memorized in his heart. When he finally picked up the violin, his hands trembled, not from fear, but reverence. The strings had loosened over time, and the wood bore the faint scars of age, but the instrument still held beauty. Keanu didn't know much about playing, but something compelled him to lift the violin to his shoulder and hold the bow. He drew it across the strings once. The sound was raw, imperfect, but haunting. He tried again. A fragment of melody came through, then another. Before long, a tune began to emerge, hesitant, unfinished, but eerily familiar. A lullaby. The one he remembered hearing in Paris, drifting through his dreams like a breeze through curtains. It was Mila's song. Tears blurred his vision as he played what little he could recall. Each note was a connection to a woman who had quietly shaped his life, believed in his future, and protected his family through silence and song. He placed the violin down and opened the letter one last time. This time, he read it aloud. "I knew the world would see you for who you truly are. Not the star, not the name, but the soul behind the eyes. You were always meant to be more than your circumstances, and you are. You've become the very light I believed in when everything around me dimmed. If you've found this, it means I never made it. But I never stopped watching from wherever I landed, never stopped loving, never stopped believing." Keanu folded the letter slowly. He didn't need to know how Mila's story had ended. He already knew what mattered. Her legacy wasn't in what she left behind, but in what she passed on. Faith, resilience, and the quiet power of being truly seen. He reached for his phone and took a photo of the letter, the violin, and the now familiar script of Mila's hand. Then he sent it to Kim with one line, "I found her." And somewhere between memory and mystery, grief and gratitude, Keanu Reeves felt something rare, a chapter closing, and a new one beginning. The letter's paper was brittle at the edges, yellowed by time, but the handwriting inside was clear and deliberate. Mila had written it in her native Czech, but Keanu could read enough of it to understand. The opening line stopped him in his tracks. "You were never supposed to know," it began, "but you were always supposed to be safe." He read slowly, each word pulling him deeper into a version of his past he had never considered. Mila described a day in Paris when things nearly went very wrong. Keanu had only vague memories of it. He was just 6 years old, and it had felt like a confusing blur. But Mila remembered every second. She had been at Diana's apartment when a call came from a contact within the Czech resistance. They warned her that people who had taken an interest in Diana's outspoken views and sudden success abroad were watching her. These weren't fans or paparazzi. These were people who saw Diana as a threat to the stories the regime wanted to tell. Mila had contacts in intelligence circles, people who trusted her after she'd passed information during the Prague Spring. Though she had laid low in the years that followed, her network had not forgotten her. When the call came, she didn't hesitate. She packed a bag for Diana and Keanu in under 10 minutes. Keanu blinked, trying to place the day. He remembered Mila whispering to his mother in the hallway, a sense of urgency, a scarf wrapped tightly around his neck. He remembered being rushed through a side door, holding his mother's hand tightly, the chill of the air brushing his cheeks as they crossed into a car waiting near the curb. Mila's letter said she had driven them halfway to the German border before transferring them to a safe route that would get them to Geneva. She didn't go with them. She couldn't. If anyone noticed her involvement, they would follow, so she stayed behind to mislead them, to buy time. She left false clues, train tickets, apartment keys, decoy bags, and erased her trail. Keanu exhaled slowly, his heart heavy with the realization she had disappeared on purpose, not out of fear, out of love. She wasn't just a friend, he murmured, more to himself than to Tomas, who sat nearby in quiet respect. She was protecting us. Tomas nodded, clearly moved. She was known for her courage, he said softly. But this was another kind of bravery. Keanu looked back down at the page. There was more. The next paragraph shifted in tone, moving from facts to emotion. Mila wrote about the pain of watching Keanu grow from a distance. She mentioned seeing his face in newspapers years later, his roles in films, his calm presence on interviews. "You had your mother's eyes," she wrote, "but your stillness, your silence in chaos, that was mine." Keanu swallowed hard. She had followed him quietly, without ever making herself known. Mila had been to several of his premieres in Europe, always staying far enough back not to be seen. She had kept clippings, tucked away photos from magazine covers, and even noted down quotes from his interviews. She had been proud of him, even as the world celebrated a man she had helped shape but could never embrace. One sentence stood alone on the page. "I never stopped loving you like my own." Keanu felt something in his chest twist, something long buried and unnamed. He had always remembered her songs, her touch on his head when he couldn't sleep, the smell of lavender and tobacco that clung to her scarf. But he hadn't known how much she had sacrificed for him. The letter continued, with one final revelation. Mila had once received an offer to defect to the United States with the help of her intelligence contacts. She declined, not because she didn't want freedom, but because Diana and Keanu were already safe. If she left, the people who had been watching would have suspected she led them out. By staying behind, she drew the attention away from them and placed it on herself. "I traded my future for yours," she wrote, "and I do not regret it." Keanu pressed his hand over the page, overwhelmed by the weight of what she'd done. She had been a shadow guardian, a second mother who had made herself invisible so he could thrive in peace. Tomas, still sitting nearby, whispered, "This is more than history. This is legacy." Keanu nodded, his voice quiet. She gave up everything and left just enough for me to find her. When I was ready, he sat back, eyes brimming with emotion, the violin case still open beside him. It wasn't just an instrument. It was a time capsule, a message, a relic of a woman whose silence had shouted volumes through time. Then he noticed something at the bottom of the letter. It was a question. "If you're reading this, does that mean you finally found me?" He whispered. "Yes, I did." Keanu stayed with the letter in silence, letting every word soak through the years he had never understood. It wasn't just a note. It was closure. It was love, sealed in ink, waiting patiently for a time when the boy with quiet eyes would become a man who could carry the truth. The last envelope in the box contained a small, pressed flower, dry, brittle, yet intact. Next to it, a short note in Mila's handwriting read, "This was from your mother's wedding bouquet. I caught it that night. I kept it for the moment you'd need to remember where you came from." Keanu smiled through the ache in his chest. He remembered that story. His mother used to laugh and say someone special had caught her bouquet, someone who vanished before she could ever thank her. Mila had been woven into his life not by accident, but by choice. Her presence had been a thread of protection, courage, and quiet sacrifice. As he placed the letters back into the box, he turned to Tomas and said, "This was her way of staying alive, through these pages, through this music, through memory." Tomas nodded. "She gave you more than words. She gave you a map." Keanu ran his hand over the violin case once more. It was scratched, but whole. A symbol of everything Mila had guarded, hidden, and passed forward. He didn't know if she was still alive, but her presence was undeniable. She had been a guardian angel in human form, choosing invisibility over recognition, silence over spotlight. He carried the box carefully as he left the archives. Outside, the Vienna sky was overcast, cool, and humming with distant street sounds. Yet something inside Keanu felt clear, lighter, as if the fog of forgotten memory had lifted, revealing the path beneath. Later that evening, he sat alone in his hotel room, holding the violin. With no camera, no stage, and no audience, he lifted the bow and played a melody that lived only in his bones. A lullaby he didn't know he remembered. The tune wove its way out of him slowly, gently soaked in history, love, and loss. He played not for a crowd, but for one woman, Mila. Wherever she was, he hoped she heard it, because this was her song, passed down through decades, now alive again. As the last note faded, Keanu whispered into the silence, "Thank you for everything." And for the first time in years, the quiet inside him felt like home. Keanu stood silently outside the Vienna Conservatory, the violin case in his hand feeling heavier than its weight. The wind rustled softly through the early morning trees, as if whispering to him that it was time. He entered through the side door, hoping to avoid attention. The front desk assistant noticed him, but didn't stop him. She must have sensed there was something important about this visit. Inside, the practice halls were quiet except for a soft echo of scales in the distance. A slender woman in her late 40s stepped into the corridor. She wore a long blue scarf and had the posture of someone who had lived her life among sonatas and silence. Her name was Clara, and Keanu had contacted her 2 days ago, asking if she could examine an old violin. She nodded as she led him into a modest room with high ceilings and warm acoustics. Keanu opened the case and gently lifted the violin. Clara leaned in. Her hands, practiced and careful, took the instrument as though it were a fragile piece of memory. She tilted it toward the light. Her breath caught. It wasn't just old. It was crafted with intent, with love. And it had been played by someone who lived through things they couldn't say out loud. Clara tuned the violin carefully. Every note brought a tightening of Keanu's chest. Then she began to play. The first note floated into the room like a question lost in time. It was soft, trembling, almost uncertain, like someone calling out into the dark, not sure if anyone would answer. Then came the next note, clearer, fuller. A pattern began to form. Not a melody Keanu recognized from any composition he'd heard before. This wasn't Mozart or Vivaldi. It was something personal, intimate. Clara's fingers danced over the strings, eyes closing as she surrendered to the music. The room began to change. The air grew thick with emotion. From somewhere down the corridor, a student paused at the door. Then another. The hallway filled slowly, people drawn in by the haunting sound. The piece rose and fell like the rhythm of breath. There were moments of hesitation, like someone had once written this while crying, wiping tears between each note. Then moments of strength, bold, soaring strokes that spoke of fierce love, of impossible choices made in silence. Keanu sat frozen. Each stroke of the bow felt like it was unearthing something buried inside him. A lullaby long forgotten, a farewell that had never been spoken aloud. His eyes burned. He blinked, but the tears still came. More students gathered, leaning against the walls, sitting on the floor. No one spoke. No one needed to. Whatever Mila had left in that violin, it was finding its way to them. When the piece reached its crescendo, Clara's hand shook slightly. Her body leaned forward, as if reaching across time. Then came the closing notes, slow, soft, like a hand letting go. Silence. No one moved. Clara opened her eyes. They were wet. "Whoever played this last," she whispered. They were saying goodbye. Keanu stood up slowly, moved not just by the sound, but by the invisible thread connecting him to a past he had barely understood until now. He stepped forward, gently lifting the violin from Clara's hands. Her fingers let go reluctantly, as if she were handing over something sacred. "I think," he said quietly, "she wrote that for my mother, or maybe for me." Clara didn't ask for details. She only nodded. "It's not just music, it's memory." Keanu turned the instrument over in his hands again. For a moment, he thought he saw a glint, faint but unmistakable. Carved into the bass, almost too faint to notice, were 3 small letters. M.K. It confirmed what his heart already knew. Outside, the afternoon sun poured through the arched windows of the conservatory, casting soft gold across the polished floors. Students slowly filed back to class, whispering with awe about what they'd heard. Some didn't speak at all. They just looked at Keanu with a strange, quiet respect, sensing they had witnessed something deeply personal, something that had nothing to do with celebrity and everything to do with love. Keanu stayed behind in the now empty room, holding the violin close. He didn't need to say anything. He just listened to the silence Mila had filled. And for the first time in years, that silence felt like peace. Tomas's voice trembled slightly as he called Keanu back to the conservatory. There had been one last room in the archive basement they hadn't yet explored, a dusty corner sealed off for decades. It was there, tucked in a worn cardboard box marked MK and buried under outdated music scores, that Tomas had discovered a single cassette tape. The label was handwritten and faded, but still legible. Live, August 1991, Café Svetlo. Keanu stood in the quiet listening room of the conservatory. The cassette player clicked softly as Tomas inserted the tape and pressed play. A few seconds of static passed before the sound of a small crowd clapping broke the silence, then settled into expectant stillness. The first notes from an old upright piano rang through the speakers. Soft, deliberate, reflective. Then came her voice. It wasn't professionally recorded. There was background noise, the hum of glasses clinking, the shuffle of feet. But Mila's voice cut through it all. Her tone was unpolished, but deeply human, each lyric delivered with raw emotion. She sang in Czech at first, the melody lilting and minor, then shifted into French. Keanu recognized one of the songs, Ne me quitte pas, the same song his mother used to hum on rainy days in Toronto. Halfway through the tape, the piano stopped, and Mila's voice spoke gently into the mic. She switched to English. If you're still here, thank you. This next one is personal, she said. I wrote it for a boy I carried in my heart. I hope he knows how much he was loved, even from far away. Keanu's throat tightened. He didn't realize he'd stopped breathing until Tomas placed a hand on his shoulder. They stood there, side by side, not speaking, as the final song began. The lyrics were simple, about longing, protection, sacrifice. Her voice cracked on the last verse. Tears slipped down Keanu's cheek as he listened. He remembered the softness of a lullaby when he was 5. A woman's silhouette at the door before dawn. A melody in a language he didn't understand, but that always calmed him. For decades, he had thought those fragments were just imagination. But now, hearing Mila's voice, everything aligned. She had never left him. She had sung through her absence. She had survived through memory. And in this song, she had left a final trace of herself, beyond letters, beyond photographs, beyond even time. The tape clicked off. Tomas exhaled slowly. Keanu turned toward the window overlooking the conservatory courtyard. It was snowing lightly outside. The quiet felt sacred. But he wasn't done listening yet. Keanu asked Tomas if he could have a copy of the tape. Tomas nodded and promised to have it digitized. But Keanu wanted the original too, cracks and all. There was something sacred in its imperfections. Something that no remastering could preserve. The warble in Mila's voice, the faint cough from the audience, even the moment her fingers hit the wrong piano key, it all made her real. Later that evening, Keanu sat alone in the conservatory's garden. The cold air brushed his face, and he held the cassette between his gloved hands like a fragile relic. It wasn't just a voice on tape. It was closure. And a beginning. He pressed the rewind button, waited, and played the final track again through his headphones. This time, he listened not as a man searching for answers, but as the boy Mila had carried in her heart. Her lyrics painted memories he never knew they shared. Hiding under a blanket during a thunderstorm, a paper boat on the riverbank, a birthday cake with one candle lit in the dark. They were his memories too. Memories someone had guarded for him. He saw now that Mila had been more than a singer, more than a friend to his mother. She had been a witness to his life before he could remember it. And when things turned dangerous, when others might have run, she stayed just long enough to ensure he would survive. Then she vanished, not for fear, but for love. What broke him most was the line she whispered at the end of the recording. The safest place I ever found was beside your smile. It didn't sound rehearsed, it sounded like something she'd waited her whole life to say. Keanu closed his eyes. It was a lullaby for the soul. The next morning, he returned to the listening room. The conservatory staff had heard about the recording, and some had gathered to listen with him. Musicians, teachers, and even young students who had never heard Mila's name sat together in respectful silence. The room filled slowly as the tape played again. Some wept. Others sat still, visibly moved, but unable to speak. A teenage girl near the back placed her hand over her heart and whispered, "That was someone who really loved." Keanu stood at the front, head bowed. He wasn't there as a celebrity. He was there as a man reclaimed by a voice from his past. A voice that had waited, hidden in a box, locked in time, yet somehow found its way to him when he was ready. As the final note faded and the cassette whirred to a stop, no one clapped. The silence said everything. That night, Keanu wrote in his journal, "She sang for me before I knew I needed it. She protected me before I knew I was in danger. And she left a song that outlived her absence." Mila's love wasn't loud. It was layered into the spaces between things. Now, I hear her everywhere. And he meant it. Because love like hers doesn't disappear. It echoes. The car moved slowly along a narrow country road, fields stretching wide on either side under a pale sky. Keanu sat in the back seat, the book resting gently on his lap. He had read the note inside it again that morning. Its folds were worn now, the corners soft with age and handling, but the words still struck deep. If you're reading this, I hope you find her. She never stopped believing in you. He hadn't expected to find her grave. Part of him believed she had disappeared into the wind, like a secret carried away by time. But Tomas had traced the record, a final hospital registration under Mila Kovarova's name, followed by a burial entry in a small village called Vlachi. As the car came to a stop beside a low stone wall, Keanu stepped out and looked around. The cemetery was modest, quiet, and well-tended. Rows of simple headstones curved gently up a slope, shaded by birch and maple trees. There were no tourists here, no traffic, no noise, only the soft hush of wind through leaves and the occasional call of a bird. He walked slowly, feeling the weight of each step. It felt like approaching something sacred, something final. The grave wasn't far. A narrow path led to a section lined with white stones. There, tucked beneath a flowering chestnut tree, he found it. The inscription was simple. Mila Kovarova. 1-9-5-8-1-9-9-3. He sang with courage and loved with silence. There were no flowers, no offerings, just earth, a quiet headstone, and the hum of wind that seemed to pause as Keanu stood still. He knelt beside the grave and placed the book gently at the base of the stone. Then, reaching into his coat, he pulled out a single white rose and laid it beside the book. For a long time he said nothing, just let the silence surround him. He could feel something in the air, not just memory, but presence. I found you, he said softly, and I understand now. You were there all along, watching, guiding, protecting. He paused, his voice unsteady. I don't know what you gave up. I don't know how much it cost you. But I want you to know I carry you with me, not as a mystery anymore, but as part of my story. He closed his eyes and bowed his head. The wind picked up slightly, lifting the edge of the book's cover. A page fluttered open, then settled. The trees above creaked gently, and somewhere nearby, a bird began to sing a low, haunting note. Keanu raised his eyes. The sound wasn't familiar in species, but something about its rhythm and tone reminded him of the violin he'd heard. The one Mila had once played. He didn't try to explain it. He reached out and touched the cold stone, then stood. Keanu stood silently, the white rose still in his hand, the book resting gently atop Mila's grave. He hadn't expected the cemetery to feel this serene. It was as if the world around him paused for a moment, recognizing the weight of what he had found and what he was letting go of. The gravestone was simple. It didn't boast of years or accomplishments. It just read, Milada Kovarikova, musician, dreamer, guardian. The word guardian echoed through him. It wasn't placed there by accident. Someone had known, someone had understood what Mila had done in her final years and the quiet strength with which she did it. He reached down, brushing his fingers gently across the carved letters. You saved us, he whispered, voice barely audible. You gave up everything, and you never asked for anything back. There were no crowds, no fanfare, just the whispering wind, the hum of distant birds, and the warmth of the sun sliding through the clouds. But Keanu didn't feel alone. He felt surrounded. By memory, by music, by her. He remembered the way her voice trembled in that final song. The way she had said, the child I carried in my heart. He'd been so young. He barely remembered her face. But now, piece by piece, he could feel her spirit fitting back into his life, like a melody returning to the right key. He stood up, inhaling deeply. As he did, the wind picked up again, not fiercely, gently, as though it was circling around him. The trees rustled in rhythm. The same faint melody he'd heard at the conservatory seemed to carry in the air, like a lullaby, like her voice still reaching across time. He didn't cry, not because the sorrow wasn't there, but because what he felt most was peace, gratitude. He had spent decades walking through the world trying to understand what made people good, why some vanished without reward while others were celebrated loudly. And here, in front of this quiet grave, he had his answer. Love didn't always shout. Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it left notes tucked into books, melodies into violins, and sacrifices no one ever saw. And sometimes it raised you, protected you, and let you go, all without ever being thanked. He stepped back, looking one last time at the grave. The rose now placed beside the stone, the book just beneath it. Then he turned, walking through the narrow path between the trees, the wind brushing his shoulders like a final touch. As he reached the gate, the sky opened slightly. A single beam of sunlight pierced through and fell right onto the grave. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. He knew she was still with him, not just in memory, but in music, in the kindness he would continue to carry forward, and in the quiet courage she had shown him all those years ago. And somewhere, deep inside, he felt the note's final message again. She never stopped believing in you. Now, finally, he believed it too. The building stood like a relic from another time. Faded paint, broken windows, a collapsed awning. This was all that remained of the music cafe where Mila once played her final songs. Keanu stood in front of it in silence, his hands in his coat pockets, the wind nudging his coat gently against his legs. He had found her grave, heard her voice, uncovered the layers of sacrifice she made. But something still lingered inside him, a weight, a whisper of unfinished purpose. He had asked himself over and over what to do with everything he had discovered. Mourning was one thing, gratitude was another. But honoring her, truly honoring Mila, meant more than memory. It meant rebuilding something she believed in, something she left behind in the shadows. So he made the call. Within a week, a crew arrived. The broken windows were replaced with tall panes that allowed sunlight to pour in. The rotting floorboards were removed, revealing space for a polished oak stage. Walls were sanded, painted, and filled with life. Keanu didn't want the place to become a museum. He wanted it to be alive. He wanted it to sing again. The new music cafe opened 6 months later. It had no neon signs, no grand announcements, just a simple plaque at the door, Mila's room. Inside, students practiced after school. Local artists performed every weekend. Elder musicians taught classes during the day. The cafe sold coffee, tea, and pastries, but it gave away inspiration for free. Keanu visited often, never drawing attention to himself. He'd sit at the back with a notebook, listening to the hum of progress. Once, he watched a teenage girl nervously step onto the stage with her violin. Her hands trembled. The audience was small, just a few people reading books or sipping espresso, but when she played, something shifted. Her sound was raw and a little shaky, but filled with fire. Keanu felt his chest tighten. She reminded him of Mila, not in appearance, but in spirit. Later that night, he stayed behind after everyone left. With the cafe empty and quiet, he walked toward the wall behind the stage. There, framed beneath soft lighting, was a small gold-etched quote carved into dark wood. "I believed in the boy with quiet eyes." He touched the frame gently. This was the place where her voice had once echoed into nights of revolution and love, where she had hidden messages for the future, where she had chosen silence so a child could have peace. Now, it belonged not to the past, but to the next generation, a sanctuary for unheard voices. But Keanu wasn't finished. He created a small endowment to fund scholarships for young musicians, especially those who had lost family or faced hardship. He wanted them to have a space where their voices mattered, where memory became melody, where pain could turn into beauty. Tomas visited the café often and helped curate a collection of old Eastern European protest songs and stories from musicians who had once performed underground. They created a tiny archival room in the back of the café, open to anyone who wished to learn. No admission fee, just curiosity and time. The café started to attract attention, not for its celebrity backer, but for its spirit. Word spread quietly. A journalist came one evening and sat through an entire open mic night without introducing herself. The next week, an article appeared titled, "The Café That Sings for the Silenced." Keanu never gave an interview. When asked, he simply said, "It's not my story, it's hers." One afternoon, as the sun poured through the wide café windows, a woman in her 60s stepped onto the stage. Her hands were delicate, her eyes quiet but strong. She didn't speak, just carried an old folder of sheet music and rested it gently on the stand. The room fell still. Even the espresso machine hushed. She began to play a melody on the upright piano, one that echoed something Keanu couldn't quite place at first. Then it hit him. It was the same tune from the cassette in Prague, the same notes Mila had once sung, trembling but full of love. Keanu stood frozen. The woman finished her piece and looked around the café with tears glistening in her eyes. "That song," she said softly, "was written by a woman I once knew. She used to sing it during the hardest years of her life. Her name was Mila." Keanu stepped forward quietly and introduced himself. They sat together by the window and talked for hours. Her name was Helena. She had been a student of Mila's before the café closed in 1991. She thought Mila had vanished. When she saw the article about the café's reopening, she had taken a train from Hungary just to see it for herself. Helena's story added even more depth to the legacy Keanu was slowly piecing together. Mila had mentored many, not just his mother, not just him, but an entire generation of dreamers who had once needed a voice in the dark. That evening, Keanu made a quiet decision. He arranged for Helena to teach part-time at the café, offering masterclasses on traditional music and memory work, sessions where students could compose music from moments in their lives. Helena accepted with grace, and soon her sessions became the most attended classes in the building. Keanu also commissioned a mural on the side of the building. He didn't want a portrait of Mila's face, he wanted something symbolic. The artist painted a young boy with soft eyes, sitting at the feet of a woman playing the piano, her figure glowing but undefined. Around them, swirls of sheet music wrapped into the sky and turned into birds. People began to stop and take photos. A quiet stream of visitors passed through the café each week, not just for the music, but for the story. Some cried, some brought their children, some left folded notes in a small box beneath the mural. Messages of hope, grief, or gratitude. Keanu read every single one. One stood out. It was written in delicate handwriting that reminded him of someone. If you're reading this, I hope you find her. Or maybe she found you first. He smiled. The message was unsigned. Keanu sat on the same bench outside where he had once stared at the boarded-up café all those months ago. Now, he listened to a young singer inside, performing a cover of Both Sides Now. Her voice wasn't perfect, but it was honest. As the final note rang out and applause filled the room, Keanu stood and whispered into the night, "She did find me." He walked away without fanfare, the wind carrying the faint sound of music behind him. For the first time in years, he felt light. like something lost had been returned, not in form, but in meaning. In a world that so often forgets, Mila had made sure her voice remained. Not loud, not proud, but enduring. And now, through this place, it would never go quiet again. 3 weeks had passed since the music cafe reopened under Mila's name. The place had already begun to draw musicians from all over Prague. Young students, traveling artists, and even retired performers who remembered its old days. Keanu didn't seek attention. He made sure the cafe's rebirth was about legacy, not celebrity. But the whispers still found their way to the surface. A local journalist named Eliska Novak had heard rumors. First, it was the violin that turned up at the conservatory. Then, someone had spotted Keanu placing a rose at a rural cemetery. Finally, the grand reopening of a forgotten cafe in the old quarter sealed it. She didn't care about headlines or scandals. She sensed a story that was deeper, one that connected art, memory, and quiet acts of love. She reached out with a handwritten note and left it at the cafe's front desk. The note was simple. If your story honors someone who shaped you in silence, I'd love to help you share it. With respect. Keanu read it 3 times before placing it into his jacket pocket. He didn't respond right away, but the next morning he arrived at the cafe before it opened and asked the staff to invite Eliska inside. They sat in the far corner booth where the sunlight slanted across Mila's mural. Keanu didn't say much at first. He listened to Eliska speak about her father, a journalist who had smuggled stories during the Velvet Revolution. He was taken in the middle of the night, never returned. All she had left were his notes and his silence. Keanu nodded gently. Eliska finally asked, "Why reopen this place?" Keanu looked up at Mila's quote framed on the wall, "I believed in the boy with quiet eyes." Then he said just one sentence. "Sometimes the people who shape you disappear before you ever know they were there." Eliska didn't press him for more. She thanked him, shook his hand, and left without recording a single second of their meeting. She understood the sacredness of what he'd offered. That night, she published a short editorial with only the quote and a photo of the cafe's interior. No name, no headline about Keanu, just the moment, but it didn't stay quiet. Someone recognized the photo, others shared stories. One woman posted, "I had a teacher like that. She used to buy me notebooks when my parents wouldn't. She died before I graduated." Another wrote, "My uncle raised me, never said a word about how hard it was, just showed up every time. I wish I'd thanked him." Within days, the post had gone viral. Thousands of comments poured in, not about Keanu, but about the quiet heroes people had loved and lost. The ones who had shaped lives behind the scenes. And Mila's quote? It was everywhere, framed on hospital walls, shared by therapists, painted on a high school art room in New Jersey, written on the back of a guitar in Tokyo. It became a quiet anthem for all the mentors who had walked beside someone in the dark. Keanu didn't comment. He didn't need to. The journalist leaned forward, sensing something deeper behind Keanu's brief words. But Keanu only smiled gently and added, "The ones who give without taking are the ones who stay with you the longest, even when they're gone." That was all he offered. He politely declined to elaborate. The clip aired on a small local network at first, but within hours it was picked up globally. The internet responded with unexpected intensity. Social media flooded with the quote. Thousands of people began sharing memories of loved ones, mentors, and strangers who had once changed their lives without ever asking for recognition. Posts with the hashtag #QuietHeroes surged. A woman from Arizona posted a photo of her elementary school janitor who taught her to read. A man in India shared how an old soldier once gave him shoes when he was a child. A nurse from South Africa recalled a nameless woman who held her hand during her first night shift during COVID. Each story echoed Mila's spirit. Small acts of love, that rippled far beyond their moment. Keanu read many of the messages late at night. They filled his inbox, his timeline, and his thoughts. What started as a private journey had become a quiet movement. The journalist who aired the piece wrote a follow-up editorial, calling it the interview that taught the world to remember. They quoted Keanu's line again and asked readers to reflect on who had shaped them, silently, without applause. A week later, a school in Toronto painted the quote on their hallway. "Sometimes the people who shape you disappear before you ever know they were there." A street artist in Berlin painted a mural of a faceless figure with a violin, surrounded by stars and pages of music. Beneath it, in cursive, was Mila's line, "I believed in the boy with quiet eyes." Keanu never claimed credit for the wave that followed. He never posted about it. He didn't attend interviews or accept awards from advocacy groups that tried to reach out. But he did return to the reopened café, quietly, during an afternoon lull. He sat by the window where the sun hit the old piano, sipping tea and listening to the laughter of the young musicians rehearsing in the next room. As he looked out the window, his reflection overlapped with Mila's mural outside. The cafe had become more than just a tribute. It was a living echo of her. And somehow, through all of it, her voice kept finding ways to reach people she never knew. When Keanu finally stood to leave, he paused at the doorway. On the wall, framed beneath Mila's handwritten quote, was a bulletin board full of pinned notes from visitors around the world. Many ended the same way, "You didn't know me, but you helped me." He pressed his hand gently to the glass over Mila's quote. Then he turned and stepped outside, disappearing into the Portland twilight, his heart lighter but full. The morning light in Portland was gentle, casting long shadows across the pavement as Keanu Reeves stepped through the doorway of the same quiet used bookstore where everything had started. The air inside smelled of old pages and memory. The bell above the door jingled softly, just as it had weeks ago, when he first stumbled upon that weathered novel tucked away in the memoir section. He moved slowly through the aisles, running his fingers along the worn spines. The store was nearly empty. A college student near the front was buried in a poetry book. An elderly man sat in the corner with a magnifying glass, carefully scanning a faded biography. But Keanu wasn't here for a book this time. In his jacket pocket, folded carefully, was a note of his own. He reached the shelf where he'd found the original one, the simple message that had turned his life upside down. "If you're reading this, I hope you find her. She never stopped believing in you." That was Mila's voice, her quiet, powerful legacy carried forward through paper and time. And now, he wanted to give that feeling to someone else. He pulled a book at random, a collection of short essays about resilience and quiet courage. Inside the front cover, he slipped in his note. It read, "If you're reading this, believe that someone once believed in you, and maybe still does." He stared at the words for a long moment, before gently closing the book and returning it to the shelf. Then, without a sound, he turned and walked out into the soft sunlight. Across the street, a musician strummed a guitar beside a cafe. The tune was quiet, raw. Keanu paused to listen. He thought of Mila's violin. He thought of the way her song had moved strangers to tears. He thought of her grave in the countryside, the single white rose, and how the wind had seemed to carry her melody even in silence. The world was full of small echoes like that, moments that might seem like coincidence, but carried meaning if you listened hard enough. As he crossed the street, he passed a young woman picking up a dropped sketchpad. She looked up and smiled. Something in her eyes reminded him of Mila. Or maybe it was just that now he looked for her everywhere, not to find her again, but to carry her forward. Back at his car, Keanu leaned against the door for a moment and looked back at the bookstore. He hoped that someday, someone would find the note. Maybe a student lost in a storm of doubt. Maybe an artist unsure if their voice mattered. Maybe someone like him, wondering if the past still held anything for them. He got in and started the engine, but he didn't drive away right away. He let the moment breathe. Then, quietly, he whispered, "Thank you, Mila, for everything." The city moved around him. Cars passed, a dog barked down the block, a child laughed somewhere out of view. And above it all, the memory of a voice, Mila's voice, lingered like the final note of a song. That evening, as the sky faded into gold, Keanu sat on his balcony overlooking the hills. He held Mila's final letter in one hand and a cup of tea in the other. The letter had worn creases now, like it had been folded and unfolded too many times, but the words still hit with the same quiet force. "You were the boy with quiet eyes, and I believed in you, even when I had to disappear." He read it again, not because he needed to remember the words, but because reading them reminded him to breathe. Mila had disappeared into silence to protect someone else's voice. She had left behind songs, memories, and clues, like little lights strung across time. He had followed them, and now he was part of the chain. The reopened café in Prague was already receiving visitors. Musicians played again where she once stood. The wall bore her words in bold script, framed with care. "I believed in the boy with quiet eyes." But now, that café belonged to everyone who had ever felt unseen, unheard, or forgotten. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about all the Milas of the world and the people they shaped from behind the curtain. He opened his laptop, not to write a post or share his journey, but to watch something again. The interview clip. Just a few seconds of him on camera saying quietly, "Sometimes the people who shape you disappear before you ever know they were there." The video had gone viral. Millions of views, tens of thousands of comments, but what moved him were the stories in those comments. One said, "I had a bus driver who used to save me a seat when no one else would. I never even knew his name, but I never forgot that kindness." Another read, "My grandmother raised me after my dad left. She never asked for anything. She just loved me until I could stand on my own." People weren't just reacting. They were remembering, sharing, grieving, healing. Keanu replied to a few comments that stood out. One from a teacher who had dedicated her life to students no one else believed in. One from a nurse who had watched over children in cancer wards for 30 years. One from a young man who said, "A stranger once gave him a meal and a warm coat on the worst night of his life, and he'd never forgotten." These were the echoes of Mila's note. They were proof that even anonymous love could ripple outward forever. Keanu closed the laptop. He stood and walked to the bookshelf in his living room. He picked a new book at random and slid another handwritten note inside. He didn't know who would find it, but maybe that was the point. Then he turned to the camera and spoke one last time, not as a movie star, not as a public figure, but as someone who had followed a single thread of kindness all the way back to the truth. "Before you go, have you ever discovered something small that changed your life forever?" He paused. "Tell me in the comments. And if you believe in the silent power of love and memory, subscribe for more unforgettable stories." He smiled gently. And with that, the story closed, not with a grand finale, but with a whisper that would keep traveling from heart to heart, book to book, memory to memory. A single voice, a quiet song, and a world made softer by their echo.